Why don't you bore me with the details?
What the hell, Freddy?
What were we talking about?
Many's the time I've dreamed of finding you like this.
You just came back.
Jesus, did you just think that up?
I was thinking about letting you talk anyway.
It's over. There's no reason to talk about it. I really don't want to talk about this. I noticed things are right where you left them.
That was nothing. I'm thinking of doing it again.
Okay, I'm sorry. Why are you so secretive? If I don't go into that office every day, who am I?
Welcome to Mad Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015, gearing our conversation around the conversation the show is having about gender, the patriarchy, and manipulating people you don't actually like into elaborate situations where they cheat on their significant others and make themselves miserable while you defrost a freezer. I'm John Negroni, and Will Ashton. Is it true that you were once diagnosed as bored?
Did you pick that because I gave you gruff about doing that as my intro?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, well, fine. If that's what you want it to be, then who am I?
Oh, man.
Who am I?
All right. Yeah, I'm trying to predict what your intros for me are going to be, and that was the one I predicted this time around. So
I changed it because you didn't predict it correctly. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to get your hopes up too high. I want to keep you hustling.
Okay.
And look over there. It's Michael Overholtz. It's so great to see you, although you walked over here with your shoes squeaking and you're covering your pants with your suit jacket. I'm not sure what to make of it.
Truth be told, I was a little nervous. I've never done one of these funny podcasts before, where you have to make jokes.
Is that your Joel Murray impression?
Yeah, I don't think it was too bad.
I thought it was pretty good. I give Mike credit.
Joel Murray is more just like, well, Memphis.
No, Mike's
not me.
much
that
closer.
Was horrible.
No, that was not good, John. Yeah. I gotta give the points to Mike on this one. He has more character. He has the voice a little bit down. Yeah.
I think you just liked it because he was more animated, and that's what
impressions
fantasy,
are.
Huh?
They're supposed to be animated takes
Not
on.
necessarily.
Oh, I mean, sure.
You just liked it more because it was better.
Yeah,
That's essentially what John just. Stick to your Joan impersonation, John.
My Joan impersonation?
Yeah.
You said Joan?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a couch here. I don't know if I can lie down and do what she was doing in this episode, right? I do have a question for you guys. I have a bunch. If I don't go into this podcast every day, then who am I?
The guy still on 9 other podcasts.
Good point.
Yeah, you have a fourth podcast now, right? Or third? No, your third.
Fourth one. What are you talking about?
You have the anime podcast now.
That's a secret, Will. You're not supposed to bring that up.
It's already.
I didn't bring it up on Cinemaholics.
It's I mean, that's debuted, right? It's not. It's out there.
Yeah, we have 3 episodes out. What am I going to say?
Okay.
Just share the title. Anna Color May surprised.
It's an anime and manga podcast run between drafts called Rookie Pirate Radio. It's out right now, and I've been doing manga recaps for One Piece with Travis Hymas, the anime editor, and we did a whole thing about One Piece Odyssey, the video game. It's been mainly One Piece lately, so yeah, that's happening. I know it's something that Will Ashton doesn't care about at all because
I support it in spirit. I'm never going to listen to it because I don't watch anime.
Nor would I encourage you to. You'd just be confused and annoyed, probably. But okay, so we're talking about season 2, episode 9, 6-month leave, and this is. It's been a while since all 3 of us were here, so I kind of missed you guys. Weirdly enough,
it's been a while.
It's been a while. So this episode was directed by Michael Uppendahl, his first episode, but far from his last with Mad Men. He's directed a lot of episodes, like 1 or 2 a season from this point. And we have longtime Mad Men writers Andre Jacquemin and Maria Jacquemin also joining Matthew Weiner, who is one of the main writers for this as well. So this episode came out September 28th, 2008. It's set in August 1962. And I'll say there's a lot of really good comedy in this episode. Say what you will about the quality, but I was kind of busting a gut a couple times. What about you guys?
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by say what you will about the quality, as if this is a lesser episode. I thought it was a good one.
I think this episode is not that great up until the last 15, 20 minutes.
John, that's a third of an episode. almost half of an episode for Mad Men. You're going to say it wasn't good?
It's about 40. So it's like about, like 40, 45 minutes. And I'd say like a little over half of it, the first big chunk, to me is kind of like, it doesn't move very well, I don't think. Like for me, it feels a little listless, especially upon the second watch. But that last whole bit, like when the three guys go to the bar and then you have the last couple of scenes, that is like really, really great. I just, that's when the episode hits its total stride.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what you mean. Maybe it's because it's been a bit of a break for me with Mad Men, but this I'll be honest, I gave in to my inner desires, and I enjoyed this episode so much I kept going for a couple episodes. I'll have to rewatch them when we do our recaps. I know, and this is, I think, my favorite. Like this little span of couple episodes is my favorite part of season 2. For as much as I honestly don't like season 2, which John has talked about a lot. So this is just it just got me started. I really like when the three guys go out. A couple old pros, known each other for a long time. Kind of feels like they have their own language.
Wow, just like three guys you might know on a certain podcast, perhaps.
I don't know what you mean.
Oh,
you mean a Rookie Pirate Radio? There's 2 of us on that.
Oh, I see.
And Cinemaholics.
Sure.
It's hard doing a podcast with 3 people, but I love it.
Well, I have one that's going to be ending fairly soon. Probably will be done by the time this episode comes out.
That's right. And I have noticed you've been a little bit more melancholic lately, because I think you know what's coming.
Well, yeah. I mean, today is after we record this, I'm going to be recording the last episode ever of Ain't Ogre Till It's Ogre.
I know you don't cry, but I can almost feel the sort of the whiff, a little bit of a sniff, a stoic sniff.
Sure, it's the end of an era.
I just can't believe it finally is Ogre. You know what I mean? Like this whole time you've been promising us that it ain't, but it is.
Well, it ain't till it's Ogre. That's the point, huh?
Well, yeah, like Don says, you got to move forward.
Yeah, speaking of moving forward, I wanted to talk about real quick the rating. So I know I've brought this up a bunch of how the ratings spike a bit in the middle of this season, and I always thought that was kind of interesting. Well, I did a little bit more digging, and I figured it out. I figured out why the ratings spike in the middle of season 2, and they start to hit a higher threshold. And it's because Mad Men won its first Emmy around this time, and that is what got people coming out. To be like, oh, what is this show? Like people were like, wait, what? And so it gave it the credibility it needed. It won the Emmy for Best Dramatic Series, and that was all she wrote. Because from this point, I mean, once we get to the Gold Violin, we really jump up, and then A Night to Remember, the highest rated of the entire season, save for episode 1 of season 2, and then now A 6 Month Leave, also pretty high ratings relative to last season. Last season, the show struggled to hit over 1 million, for most of it, but not so in season 2. So we are in the thick of it. I was going to mention, this is a very, like when I'm talking about the comedy, like I'm not just talking about a lot of the jokes, like Roger being like, is it Milwaukee, and stuff like that. But also there's a lot of the dry humor, like Rachel with the Menkins bag. There's a lot of like funny Mad Men situational comedy, like Don punching Jimmy Barrett and the whole thing with Freddy peeing his pants. There's a lot of good stuff here. So let's jump in. I like this episode, again, because of the last 15 minutes, but it sounds like, Will, you like it a lot. Why do you like it a lot? What is clicking for you with this episode? I mean,
I would say I don't like it as much as A Night to Remember, the previous episode, but I think it complements that episode very well. I mean, they're, kind of one the same. I think Matt Zoller-Slice,
Madman Carousel put it in the same chapter, right?
Exactly, yeah.
See that.
So, I mean, I think, it's easy to kind of complement one another. It seems a little sad that, I mean, for listeners, they won't notice this, but like we had kind of a break between, with the Christmas season stuff, between recording that last episode and recording this one. So I kind of wish we had watched these a little bit sooner from one another, because they do kind of feel connected spiritually. But I did, because I always watch the episode twice. So I watched it right after our conversation, but you guys don't want to do that. Well, I mean, what
because you have social lives or something.
Sure.
I don't know.
I like to go in fresh, give my fresh opinion. I thought that was my contribution to this podcast.
Yeah, mine is that like I watch it once and I don't take any notes, and then I watch it again and I take way too many notes, and then I delete the notes so that I can look at it.
And then if I watched it twice, then you guys would give me crap for just watching it, having seen it before, whatever.
Well, let's be clear.
No.
We'll give you crap no matter what. Will, I mean,
Yeah, also, it would only give you a major crap if that second viewing you did it at somebody else's house in the midst of a party.
And then,
Right.
2013 or whatever, 10 years ago?
yeah, if you went back in time. But yeah, so did you still have more to that answer to the question?
No, I mean, I just thought it was like a solid episode. I didn't have as much to say, but I thought it was a good one. I don't know if I'm like in love with it, but solid.
He's drowning a bit, Mike. You might need to help him. What did you think of the episode?
I mean, John, you kind of set him up. I mean, this is a really funny episode. Just even alone with I like that you brought up like the dry comedy. There's just so many interactions, and I feel so comfortable with the characters at this point that now when you start to do stuff like, Freddy Rumsen peeing his pants, it's not this random thing or like, oh, where's this storyline about? It's just kind of this isolated, like, holy shit, Freddy's peeing his pants. Like, this dude is a doofus. And they even barely kind of set it up, right? They're just like, I'm sad about my daughter who has bad boyfriends, and so I've been drinking all day, essentially. And then to see Pete spiral.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Well, I mean, they kind of set up where he's, kind of wobbling and stuff, and then he gives Sal like a huge glass of whiskey, and he has that very comedic kind of like expression on his face. So, I mean, you can tell if something's a little off, but yeah, it does feel a little sudden when suddenly, things turn south and his pants become wet and all that.
But isn't that how that would go, right? It wouldn't be this like,
Sure.
You see signs of it. It would you just show up and be like, oh my God, my coworker is fucking plastered right now.
Sure.
And then to see Pete spiral and try to figure out what to do, because just Pete is the worst person in crises ever. Like, he just has no chill about him, is just like also so great.
It reminds me of like in Flight 1 when he finds out his dad dies and he's frozen. He's like, what do I do? What do I do? And in this, it's the same kind of dynamic where he's just like, well, do I cancel it? What do I do? And then Peggy has to take control. But of course, in classic Pete Campbell fashion, he, takes all the credit, and Duck is just like, it's a good thing Pete was there, took the controls, threw Peggy Olsen in as if it was his call. I struggled a little bit when I was like kind of piecing all the pieces of this episode together, because it starts off with Marilyn Monroe, the newspaper story that she passed away. I believe it was August 4th, either August 2nd or August 4th, forget exactly, when she passed away in 1962. And
ironic timing. I just saw her house. I was in Palm Springs. Just want to throw that out there.
I thought you were going to mention that you had just watched Blonde, now on Netflix.
I would never mention that.
Well, Roger probably would have had a little bit more sympathy for Marilyn Monroe if he had watched that new Ana de Armas picture. I know, Will, that is a point of contention between you and me, Blonde.
I still haven't seen the movie yet, but I'm excited to see it once I finally get a chance to do so.
There's the contention. It's just like, here's this movie that John and most people hate. I was like, I'm so excited to see it.
No, I'm excited. I mean, I just don't know what you're going to do if I like the movie.
I mean, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to, take you to dinner and just be like, Will, you're going to take a 6-month leave of this podcast. Okay. You're going to dry out.
I did see that earlier today, not to date the podcast, it got nominated for 10 Razzies?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
10 seems like a low number, but anyway.
It's so bad.
So you didn't like it either, Mike. Okay. It's good to know.
It's pretty bad. I think one major thing about this episode that does kind of connect everything together, although it takes a while for it all to click into place, is people are hiding their true selves all over the place. It starts with Marilyn Monroe, hiding how alone she felt. Although, not necessarily because she wanted to, but because that's the peril of fame, right? And I think all the characters are keeping secrets in this way. Don is trying to hide his marriage being on the rocks. Roger is hiding his affair with Jane and how he really feels about Mona. Peggy is trying desperately to hide what happened with Freddy to protect him. Freddy is trying to really hide, how serious this issue is, but then also he's trying to sort of like pretend like it's going to be okay and that he has a plan. And that's why I think when he says that thing to Don about like, what am I going to, no, seriously, like, what am I going to do? I think he's like, that's really hitting Don, because he's kind of being real with Don for a second, like giving him that chance. And I want to say, if there's one thing that really brings the whole episode together for me, it's Joel Murray. I just think that he's so good in this show, and it makes me kind of sad when this episode happens, because I'm like, gonna miss you, Freddy. I hope you come back, and yes, Michael and I have seen the rest of the show, so we know if he comes back, but obviously we'll keep that in the air.
Okay, I was gonna look it up if he had any more episodes after this, but
don't do that. Don't you want the mystery, the happenstance?
I mean, I do know this is the last episode with what's his name? The comedian.
Jimmy Barrett.
Jimmy Barrett. Yeah, this is the last time we see Jimmy Barrett. Is that correct?
No, we're not gonna say. It's all about the mystery. It's all about
All right,
who knows.
fine.
Maybe.
All right,
We'll
fine.
find out.
When Freddy, in the same vein, John, when Freddy says, "What am I going to tell my wife?" He says her name, but I can't remember it.
What am I
That's the
going to
part
tell
that
Violet?
also-
Oh, I thought you could do
Exactly.
the impression, Michael.
What am I going to tell Violet? God, seriously. What am I going to do? Just because, it goes from, him at the beginning of the dinner being like, oh, yeah, well, we'll move here. We'll do this. I hear Boston's
we'll
great.
go
All
to
this
Philly.
stuff.
Yeah, Boston.
And then-
they'd love to do what we do here.
Then the realness sets in and he's realizing, man, my life is spiraling. And I mean, so many things we talked about with Mad Men, we are where we work, and so much of personality in Mad Men is tied to this. So it's hard to see Freddy just kind of stabbed in the heart.
Yeah, this whole episode reminds me of Death of a Salesman, and obviously that was clearly like a prominent, story for Weiner when developing these characters. Although I was going to mention, this is one of the few Mad Men episodes, one of the rare episodes where we see pretty much all of the major characters have at least like one moment. Peggy and Pete and Joan and Roger and Don. The only kind of major character we don't see is Cooper. He just gets offhandedly mentioned. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, and Betty, and all of that. So I have a lot of notes on this episode. Where do you guys want to start? Was there anything that you wanted to hone in on that you thought, because I could go all day on this. I could go set by set, but I want to spare you two.
I think Betty was interesting in this episode for me, and I think there's a lot to dive into here.
Yeah, let's set that up real quick. So Betty, we see a lot of her. We see, every once in a while a scene where she's at home and she's kind of doing something, and you kind of have to a lot of these are like wordless scenes. We see her like I was saying before, like defrosting the freezer, doing like shelf lining, reading Ship of Fools. Clearly, like something's going on there. I have my interpretation of like what that's setting up, and then what happens with her and Arthur and Sarah Beth Carson. But did either of you guys have anything that kind of clicked for you with that?
Yeah, she's trying to just I think it was a very crude reference that I thought of, but just like she's trying to like repiece herself together and make herself new, right? She is like trying, and she's avoiding taking care of the broken parts of her, and now focusing on like, well, I can fix these little annoying broken parts of my home. But I do want to say I was blown. I wish I actually would have seen this episode or watched this episode back when I was like 20, because I worked at a place that had an old like freezer that we kept. It was like a kegerator, and that freezer froze over so often. And it was my job to but I just chipped at it with like a screwdriver. If I would have just known, I could put a hot bowl of water in there. I don't know if you ever tried to defrost those things. It is annoying.
I've defrosted a coffin freezer, which is a little bit easier because you don't have all the dripping. But yeah, I mean, it's not fun no matter, no matter how you slice it. That's interesting because, yeah, the first thing I kind of picked up on was like, man, she is bored. Like, I think that a lot of this episode is when characters are talking to each other or talking about either themselves or someone else, you can sort of switch it. So when Sarah Beth Carson says like, oh, he thinks I'm bored, I think this is like Betty is bored. When somebody's talking about Marilyn Monroe, they're talking about themselves. When Roger says or he's talking about like Don's marriage problems, Roger's talking about himself. There's a lot of that switching around. And with Betty, I think a lot of this is like she has nothing to do. Like she is just so I think she is so conflicted about what's going on because she just literally spends the whole day not doing anything because she finishes the housework so early and she doesn't want to spend time with her kids. She's too depressed for that. And this whole Don thing, I think she's obviously that excitement of her life comes from, an aspect of him. And I think she hates that. And I think she's struggling with that until the end of the episode where it comes together in the sense where she's actually spending time with her kids and like teaching, you know, Betty how to do like the stirring and everything. And like, you know, while Carla does the vacuuming and like choosing to raise her kids instead of Carla, I think is like sort of the, you know, I guess what you're supposed to take from that. Unless either of you disagree, but what do you think, Will? You're doing your Will scratching chin motif, which is one of my favorites.
My motif. I didn't know I had motifs.
Yeah, you have all kinds of things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a big part of this episode, as you mentioned, is like the idea of kind of keeping up appearances and trying to hide one's sadness or one's fear, and then like we have this sort of national story, like we said with Marilyn Monroe, where people are lamenting the tragedy of it, but also not really recognizing the like irony of their own lives kind of being it maybe not as deeply tragic, but certainly similar as far as like not being able to voice their own things or feeling they need to kind of keep appearances. And with Betty, yeah, I just like that this is one of the first times where we really don't see her like made up. Like she's not wearing makeup. She doesn't have her hair kind of dressed up for like the first half of the episode. I mean, it's very stark to see her kind of in this kind of barren, isolated position and allowing herself to kind of be herself more in some respects, but also kind of hiding herself and also trying to keep appearances at the same time. And yeah, I mean, it's another great showcase for this character,
January Jones,
and January Jones as well. Yeah, I mean, and I definitely like seeing a lot more of Carla this time around. I feel like she's often, you know, as you would expect, a character doesn't really get a lot of time to shine. And so I really enjoyed her scene with Carla and getting to know more about her, learning a little bit more there. And yeah,
we're getting more race mentions and like more acknowledgement of that in this era. Like we start the episode with Hollis, you know, who mentions Joe DiMaggio, which is kind of a funny line. And then we also have Carla, as you mentioned. We have Floyd Patterson, the boxer, at one point. We get to see him. So yeah.
But I mean, also like there's all the acknowledgement that like Hollis seems to be depressed as well, and that he.
Yeah, it's affecting him. Yeah. And then also Roger mentions to Dawn that BBDO, one of the other ad agencies, has hired a black person. They don't say if it's a guy or a girl, but you know, either way, like, you know, Dawn responds like, "I'm glad I'm not that kid," and you know, typical of that era, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, just like there is something just kind of ironic and tragic that he kind of used that opportunity to finally voice these feelings, hoping to kind of have a moment of sympathy, and they still, even Peggy seems to be kind of ignoring him, which is
right. Yeah. Well, yeah, his line where he's just like, "Some people hide in plain sight," is, you know, that's a very Weiner sort of. I think I would assume Weiner wrote that line, but I could be wrong. But he is, of course, referring to like how Marilyn Monroe felt alone, and then the obvious parallels between Marilyn Monroe and Betty in this episode are obvious. Like Betty is depressed, she's alone, she feels isolated, she's like drunk, she's, you know, clearly like not feeling well, and people look at her and they're, you know, Sarah Beth Carson looks at her, it's just like, Dawn's perfect, you know, and then she mentions a therapist. So they obviously will remind Betty that she has a therapist, and she mentions that like, "Oh, he thinks I'm bored," and Betty's like, "Bitch, you don't know bored. Like, you don't know what I'm going through right now." And she's just like trying to hush Carson away. Pisses Betty off so bad. Like, don't piss off Betty, because Betty's gonna turn your life into a dollhouse, and she's just playing around with you. But yeah, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I guess I was gonna bring up. Does that make Betty like a step cut queen? Like, I don't understand. Like, what title you would be able to give to Betty for what she does with her?
She's just a mean girl. She's a real Regina George, you know, the neighborhood.
Totally. Because I was actually surprised when she was going through all those things that Betty just didn't snap on her there, which would be very Betty, you know, just to have this, hear all this and think about how bad her life is and just have this emotional outburst. But it's even kind of scarier that she just internalizes it and just essentially ruins this woman's life. Or attempts to, at least. I guess we don't know what happens yet. But
yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
Will hasn't seen the next episode. You know, well, maybe he has. 2013 was a difficult time.
Remember St. Patrick's Day 2013 at 3:37 p.m.
Yeah, somebody had Mad Men playing on their like little Tamagotchi, and Will was just kind of peeking over their shoulder.
He didn't see anything, but he heard everything coming out of the Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah, I was celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and someone had it on their Tamagotchi at the bar, at the pub, I should say, and just I was casually catching glimpses of it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was gonna talk about with the therapy thing. I like that throughout the episode we see people constantly kind of in that same position on the couch, like kind of like resting.
I was going to mention that too. Yeah. So there 4 characters are caught on the couch. And clear like sort of connection to therapy. So Dawn is on the couch, gets woken up toward the end. Freddy Rumsen wakes up on a couch after he was drunk. Joan is on the couch in Roger's office, and Pete is on the couch just resting when Peggy shows up. So, and all of those, the context of all those scenes are about like how the characters are feeling about a certain thing.
But also Joan was on the couch when she's woken up to retrieve the dress.
Joan.
Oh, you said Joan? I thought, sorry. I meant to say Betty. Betty was on the couch.
Oh, Betty.
Yeah. So
what part was Betty on a couch?
At the beginning when she's like drinking after she read the book and she's like laying on the couch and then she gets the door. But she's not. Oh,
yeah. But I was thinking more of like sleeping on the couch. Yeah,
but not like facing up. But yeah, she is facing. She's the one person on the couch. But she's facing down. I don't know if that meant anything.
Sure, you can throw that in. Yeah, sure. There's enough room in the gumbo. Yeah, very, very, very astute there. She's reading Ship of Fools by Catherine Ann Porter. I've never seen the movie, never read the book, so I had to look it up. And I mean, certainly you can kind of see like why Betty would be reading this, both contextually. It was like a very popular book in 1962. Very, very like if Oprah's book club was around back then, it'd probably be that kind of novel. But I looked it up, and like the whole point of the book is like the characters are on a ship, you know, the Ship of Fools idiom, of course, but also it's about a bunch of people like searching for utopia, searching for, you know, a different way to get to a better place, because this is a book sort of set around pre-World War II and like right before the Nazis, you know, took power. And this is a book where people think that they'll find happiness if they maybe go back to the past via nostalgia, or if they go to a new place where things are exciting. And it kind of represents, I think, Betty sort of wondering like where she should end up, like what's going to make her happiest, going back to where she was, or if it's better if she goes to like a new place, right?
Is that a commentary on people watching Mad Men in that first season, think it would be a way to go back to a simpler time, but not realizing the complexities that lied therein?
Sure. And being blindsided by like, oh, this is a show that's actually like analyzing you, the viewer, you know, as much as the characters therein. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, is this a Mad Men podcast or a Don't Worry Darling podcast?
Why not both?
Sure.
I did think of Don't Worry Darling during this episode, just because, you know, like the housewife being like, oh, I'm done. What do I do now? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was going to ask as well with Marilyn Monroe. Like, I know she was like staying in like a hotel, or like she was kind of privately excluded for the last few months of her life. Was it 6 months? Is the title kind of a nod to that as well, in addition to the 6-month leave for Frank?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that was. I'm not aware of that history that it was 6 months.
I don't know if it was 6. That's why I'm asking. I don't know if it was 6 months. So,
I don't know.
Yeah,
I will say at first, you know, I think it's interesting that at first you see the secretary as being really upset, right? And it's sort of played off as like, as Joan says, like, I'm just another frivolous secretary. But I think that that's purposeful in the sense that I think what the episode is getting at is that these women idolized Marilyn Monroe, right? They modeled themselves after her. We have a whole episode earlier this season, right, about how the whole Playtex campaign was going to be around women wanting to be like Marilyn Monroe, like having that as a fantasy. And it's really hard when somebody you idolize and model yourself after commits suicide and reveals that the entire time they felt alone, they felt depressed, and they were willing to take their own life. And stuff like that, I think, is very, very like demoralizing, debilitating. So I think it's really smart to like hone in on that even Joan is affected by this. It's not like kind of the other things where like the secretaries are sniffing, you know, around the radio because of some, you know, tragedy that happens in the news. It's really something that I think is like hitting deep, which I think it was a good move for the script.
And I mean, I thought it was pretty telling that, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mike, but that she was like, oh, she was so young. And I felt like, you know, throughout the season, she's been very kind of self-cautious about her age, about aging, about getting older, and like recognizing that like people only will often view her solely for her looks. And she's kind of proven right in some respects, because when she's having this kind of personal, intimate moment, Roger just kind of comments on her looks and, you know, is being catty and all that. And so, I thought that was all very interesting.
I also thought about like how all the secretaries are kind of like on the cusp of power. Like they're around all these men who get these big salaries and spend it how they want and do all these things. And if they're, good, they get it spent on them by the men in the office. And so this idea of seeing Marilyn Monroe as the person who does have everything, and you view yourself as, I'm so close to that. Once I have that, I'll finally be happy. And then to see her kill herself, it's like, wow, she killed herself and I have this life. Man, my life is so pathetic and so bad. And I think suicide does that to a lot of people, right? You compare your situations, and especially with celebrities, you feel like your personal situation is worse. So like, what is there to live for?
Right.
And
I think that's spot on.
And I mean, looking at that headline from the newspaper that Don gets at the beginning of the day, it's like even sort of sensationalizing this very tragic news. It's like, was it like assisted murder or suicide? Like they're like trying to figure out like the details, supposed to mourning the loss of this pivotal iconic figure.
Like actually like dealing with it, reckoning with it. Instead, it's like turned into a sensationalized news story. It's pretty sad.
And knowing Weiner, I bet that was like a real headline, right? I bet you that was
it looked like a real,
that was said.
Yeah, I wasn't able to dig that up, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just found like an archived newspaper and printed it out. That's most likely. Because it would have taken a lot of work too to try to just like create a new one. But anyway, I was going to mention too, because since you mentioned the hotel room, I had in my notes that I think it's interesting that Don's hotel room at the Roosevelt looks not exactly, but like almost exactly like his room at home. And I think that's like extremely purposeful that he wakes up and like, I think the point is that you're supposed to be a little disoriented like he is, that like, oh, Don's, oh no, this is a hotel room. And like, that becomes plainly obvious.
No, yeah, I had the same experience. Cause like when that first shot came out, I was like, did things actually kind of work out with like off camera? Did we, miss this moment where Don's actually back in the house? It's like, nope, he's at the hotel. That makes sense. Yep. He's in the doghouse.
Yeah. And then not long after that, right? Like they're talking about Marilyn Monroe in the elevator. And Don mentions how suicide is disturbing, right? And so you have to figure that he's thinking about Adam in this instance, because Adam, of course, killed himself in the first season. And I noticed this on the second watch of this episode, that Don is also staying in a hotel in the city on the 5th floor, like his brother did. And so that, not 5G, but 508, but still, that's like really, really close. I will note for the record that Will pointed in the air because he was.
Oh yeah, it was very astute of you. But you think he requested that, or do you think that was just a coincidence? Like he was just like, "Do you have anything on the 5th floor?"
Well, that's the thing. When I saw the number was 508, I was like, 5G. At first, I was like, that's probably a coincidence, But then I think like the fact that he mentions the thing about suicide right after this, that's what started to make me think, oh, okay, I think that is actually like a purposeful decision.
No, I mean creatively, I think it was purposeful. I meant for Don. Do you think he requested when he got to the hotel? It's like, do you have anything
I see what you're saying.
on the 5th floor? It's like, why?
I doubt. No, yeah, I don't think he. that's not our guy. He's not that ruminative.
Not to pull back the curtain too far, but my apartment number is 508.
No way.
Wow. Think about that, bro.
I hope you don't also live at 152 Riverside.
Oh, wow.
No, John, you know my address. It is.
And then Michael doxed himself. I do want to mention, I really like when Peggy, she mentions how like, oh, it's a good thing we didn't run the Playtex campaign. Like right after they're kind of like, being a little, doing their whole like, well, what a sad thing for Marilyn. And then Peggy gets very like, she has her little bit of like business first kind of attitude. And you can see it's the way that Don reacts. It's like, you can interpret multiple things from it. For me, I see, at first, I think you see pride, right? It's just like, she's, my real protege. But I also think Don is like low key a little scared of her, a little bit like, if there's anybody who could take my job, or if there's anybody who I think like actually is like kind of dangerous, it's Peggy, because like she is this young and she's picking up on stuff like this. And you notice too, like he looks at her twice as he's walking away. So I had to note that. Maybe I'm being a little bit like overzealous there, but yeah, I think maybe a small part of Don, it's like pride mixed with feeling a little threatened almost.
I think you're exactly right. I interpret it as like he himself hadn't exactly thought about it yet. And it was like, oh, wow, she thought of this. Oh, no, I didn't think about this.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't my first thought.
Yeah, who's like, oh, I'm like so in my feelings right now because of what's going on at home that I'm slipping up at work. Maybe that might be a little bit of a stretch because we find out like he's chairing the blood drive. So clearly he has plenty to do at work. I love that delivery from Roger. He's like chairing the blood drive. And like Don's like, God damn it. That is pretty pathetic. Speaking of which, I hope our blood drive goes a bit smoother than the one in this episode that we're doing. I think I'm aiming for 100% participation. Yeah.
Will, I want you to go onto the street and find anybody you can, $1 a head.
Yeah. Who wants to be a podcaster for a day? Wait, does Will keep the $1?
Yeah.
Also, I was kind of wondering too, like, he's not seeing his kids as much. And so I did write down, like, does he see Peggy as more of like a daughter? But then I was like, I don't know. I don't know if it goes that far. I don't think he like sees her as progeny. I think it's more of like his like successor, like the next generation, which sometimes you can read into like children, but I don't know. I guess I got up into that because I was thinking too about the later scene he has with Sally, which, look, I know Michael, well, sidebar, Will doesn't cry as he claims all the time. Like, I don't cry.
Cry during movies, they said. It's not that I don't.
Yeah. Well, Will cries, probably in private, probably in secret, kind of like Marilyn Monroe. And, maybe I have a feeling he cried when Sally was like, but you just came back. And you're just going to leave again.
It's a touching scene.
I could see it.
It'll go by just like that.
The tears probably just like got caught up in the bottom of those glasses rims.
Will's like coughing like really severely for now. Don't do it.
I did have a thought though with the view Peggy as a daughter or not, and I just think Don doesn't give that big of a shit about Sally. I think he does when he does, and most of the time he doesn't.
Well, it reminds me like when he looks at Sally as like an extension of himself. He does do that at times.
Well, I think Don is Don, so he's so concerned with like death, the end of his life, the end of his career probably is actually probably the bigger thing. And someone like Don is going to want to control what the death of his career looks like. And that looks like training and having someone to replace him that he absolutely was responsible for. So then he can still feel better about himself when he doesn't have any more good ideas.
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, I feel like with Don and Peggy at this point, he just sees her as like a peer and certainly has more respect than he would for probably most of the other colleagues that he's working with at this point. But I was more curious to ask you guys about what Don is feeling towards Jane at this point. Like, I feel like their scenes together have a little bit more ambiguity as far as like, does he look at her like a peer? Does he look at her kind of like a father-daughter sort of thing? He
doesn't know her at all.
I know, but that's what I mean. Like,
I love that line.
Yeah.
I love when she's like, I hope you know that I can be discreet. He's like, look, bitch, like, I don't know you. I don't give a shit about you. You are like replaceable. No, but I think there is like the Jane stuff in this is very interesting. First off, I think it has been hinted at, and I think we kind of get a little bit of a clear indication that she is Jewish. And she, the whole Menkins thing, certainly kind of like takes Don a little bit like, you clearly don't know Don. Like, if you were going to get something from Menkins, like, she doesn't know that Menkins used to be a client, clearly, and that there's a little bit of bad blood there. But in terms of the Jane stuff, there is a little bit more of like a softening between her and Don. And according to Weiner, part of the episode was supposed to have a misdirect to make the viewers think that like, oh, maybe, Don is going to have something going on with Jane. But I never picked up on that. I think that's something that they might have intended, but I don't think it comes through at all.
I mean, I think there's definitely something there. Like, I picked up some stuff, but I mean, I didn't know if that's where they were going or if that was just something that they were kind of like potentially hinting at because Don's in this vulnerable place and there's this woman who's like, very kind of dotting and caring for him if he was going to be kind of caught up in a moment of weakness. Certainly Don's known to have affairs kind of on a whim, as we see this season. So I wasn't I thought it was a possibility, but didn't seem likely. I just didn't quite know that was being hinted at in the earlier part of this episode.
I saw it was like one way. I think I saw Jane maybe flirting with him, but also I think that's just how Jane does her job, because that's what she thinks secretaries are supposed to do.
See, I disagree.
And I do just want to say it's funny you say Don has affairs on a whim. Boy, Will, you don't know nothing yet.
Look, I will just point out, I do not think Jane has that kind of thing. I think Jane is treating him like she's being a bit of a mother figure to him, because I think that she and Roger are sort of like trying to be parental to Dawn. So, as we find out at the end of this episode, she and Roger have been sleeping together, and a lot of things in this episode will click into place once you realize that, right? So the fact that Roger is sort of like, oh, should you ask the missus? Clearly, like, once Jane found out about what's going on, she told Roger, and Roger's playing it off like he figured it out on his own, of like, I know what's going on. You come in too early, like, no, Roger doesn't pay close enough attention to anything to like pick up on stuff like that, honestly.
Yeah.
But
Also,
I think
why would
and
he
Jane
know that he comes in early? Sorry.
How would
Roger comes in at noon?
Yeah. But also, I think that they're treating Dawn like, the goofy kid, and that she's kind of trying to be not treating him like a boyfriend, but treating him like a son.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like that's kind of part of Roger's whole complex, right? That he constantly lives in his father's shadow. He's seen as a son himself. So he kind of like
his dad drank more than Dawn and him put together.
Exactly. Yeah. So I feel like there is some sort of like complex there for him too, where he kind of wants to be his own man, but he's, living under his father's shadow. I don't believe we've ever seen, or may not ever see. I have no idea. But I think that stuff is interesting as well. I was just kind of chuckling to myself, thinking of like Roger giving the tip about Mickens to Jane. It's just like, he really seems to like Mickens. He goes there a lot. Maybe you should give him some shirts from there.
I definitely thought that it was Roger's idea to do the shirts. And that was where Jane got the idea, because I don't think she had that initiative. But I just have the feeling that she's the one who chose Menkins because she's Jewish, and like that was like her thinking, and she didn't realize. And
no, I get that.
I don't think Roger would have told her to do that.
No,
I don't think.
I'm just goofing around. I just think it's funny, the idea of like him just not being aware of that and just being like, he really spends a lot of time at Menkins. He must like that shop a lot. You should go over there. Yeah. That'll really cheer him up.
He even mentions this guy Tilden Katz, like he's a big fan. Like that guy, he wants to be him. Oh man, we'll get to that, huh? So now the Freddy scene, which where do you guys want to start with that? Because Freddy's very drunk. He says that his oldest turned 30. That she has had a bunch of bad boyfriends, and so she's getting a little bit like in a spinster sort of mindset. And he's been drinking a lot. And, he's been drinking throughout this season. For the first time, I kind of was wondering if like maybe the reason he drinks is because like he's trying to hide. Like they get to mention in this episode that, he was a World War II veteran, but also like he killed 15 people. And like you see Freddy and he's just like kind of a happy-go-lucky guy. I wonder if like part of the reason he drinks is to stay that way. Because he mentions that like he keeps up with the clients. Like he comes off like as a fun drunk. But you get the sense that he thinks that when he's sober, he's not like that, because then like the reality starts to cruise in. And I think that's connecting too with the Marilyn Monroe stuff, with the depression of people trying to hide who they really are.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think it's about like keeping up appearances. And I think for him, he feels like he can't really do his job fully unless he's like drunk and being kind of goofy and, telling jokes and all that stuff. And I feel like there's also part of him that like, because he's part of the older guard that, like we said, like, they would drink all the time, even more so than Dawn and Roger do. Like, I feel like he feels like he kind of needs to do that to kind of keep up appearances. But now, like, and there's probably some anxiety too about like, like there's these new younger people coming into the office, the sense of like his job isn't maybe as stable as it once was. And that's maybe fueling his anxiety and maybe his fuel to drink. But I mean, I think more than anything, it's just him trying to keep up appearances, and later, ironically, trying to keep up appearances that he's like, no, I'm sober. I can cut back on drinking whenever I want to, and all this stuff. So it's, yeah.
I think the line for me that was key about Freddy's like mind space was when he's talking, like he's making excuses, and he does say like, oh, I've never done one of those funny type speeches before. Because that seems to be like a pretty common pitch that gets used in Mad Men by, people like Peggy or Dawn, or even just in, pitch meetings, people are kind of bringing up those ideas. And Freddy is so senior and advanced in his career. It's kind of crazy. You're like, oh yeah, you're the old school guy. You're not on the cutting edge of innovation. And, people can do that better than you. Like you're old, which again, repeated theme in Mad Men. And it was really interesting just to throw that one line in there.
Yeah, because you see that he's good at his job, but like, yeah, I think you're exactly right, Mike. Because he even says like, shouldn't the artwork come first? And I think that that's kind of showing that he's like kind of set in his ways. Whereas like, no, I mean, Peggy and Sal seem to be like the new dream team on campus, and part of me really wishes we could have seen Peggy do the Samsonite pitch. I'm curious where that's going. Like, why do you hate your Samsonite? Why is it empty? Fill it up. But we don't get to see it. I think that that's intentional because this is not supposed to be a celebratory moment for Peggy. And so I think it would be a confused message if we did see it, and, it'd be kind of weird, but still, I kind of want to see it because I love seeing Peggy thrive. It's one of my favorite moods in Mad Men for sure.
John, when you started the segment, you asked us where we wanted to start, and exactly where I want to start is discussing where Freddy's pee stain in his pants started. Did anyone notice how low that was on his pant leg?
Yeah, he's
if you get what I'm saying.
Oh man,
yeah. I know what he used to kill those 15 Nazis.
A certain type of energy that is very big.
Yeah.
It takes me back to when he played the song with his zipper. Like, goddamn, man, you can't be that violent near the goods.
He probably has to use that zipper a lot, because he can't walk around sometimes with the way things are going. But I was wondering, like, why are people like watching him as he's walking? It's like they must do that all the time. They just want to catch a glimpse.
Sure.
Yeah.
But no, I was gonna say. I mean, I did appreciate that scene. Like, the squeaking of the shoes is, I feel, very poignant. Just like the idea, like he feels he can hide this thing, but like it's so obvious, and he's just like trying to like walk through, and then like he even says something just like, "Well, another day in the books" or something.
That's it for today.
Yeah, that's it for today.
That's it for today.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously because he's been passed out for a long time, he's so unaware that like this is pretty much everyone in the office knows, and that word's kind of spreading like wildfire already. And yeah, it's kind of funny, but it's also just kind of sad, which is I feel like how this whole episode is, like kind of funny, kind of sad the whole time.
Yeah, you get a nice range of those emotions too in the office. Like, Peggy's horrified, Sal is laughing hysterically, and Pete is disgusted.
But, yeah, I mean, did you think Sal though was like actually laughing, or do you think he was like kind of like keep like playing it up a little bit?
I think he found it genuinely funny.
Okay.
Like those were some real like, and I just again the comedy of it because like in context, like they just found out like Marilyn Monroe passed out and didn't wake up.
Yeah,
and so I think that's why Sal's just a bit like. Is he dead?
Sure.
Like there's a little bit of that horror.
Okay.
But like when Peach is like, he's not dead, he's fine.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
I also think that was like the different generations of workers there with like their different opinions, right? Sal, a little bit more experience, been around the boys more, doesn't take it seriously, so he's laughing. Then there's Pete who came up and is kind of the duck protege who just gets mad at things, and then there's Peggy who's the youngest and has worked owed a lot to Freddy and is really defensive and worried about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting when Freddy says later, it's just like Pete Campbell. Never thought I was in his way, and it's like, I mean, who isn't? Like it just seems like Pete will he'll step over
his
anyway.
dad.
I will say
the ghost of his dad I think is in his way a little bit.
Yeah.
That's different than his dad, bro. I wanted to ask though, when's the last time you guys peed your pants in public?
In public?
I don't think I've ever peed my pants in public.
Man,
get out of here! Even when you were a kid.
I was saying it had to be like when I
did.
was like in elementary school or something. Like I can't be. Like,
I had to have been in diapers.
Wow.
Well, John, you wore diapers until 19, so that doesn't really give us much.
Who said I stopped?
Oh man.
Yeah.
I was gonna compliment you, John. Your Joel Murray impression's getting better. There.
I was just kind of easing into it. And
there
you guys just wrote it off immediately.
Well, I mean, before it was not as good. Now it was a little bit better that time, so I liked it. Try to give you a compliment, and then you get mad at me. So what's going on?
I was just wondering where to go next.
Well, I was going to say that, like, I think it's interesting that, like, when Don hears the news about Freddy peeing his pants, like, he also laughs, like, pretty hard. And then,
oh yeah, he doesn't take it that seriously. Actually, like he's a little bit just like, wait, what?
He's like, get out of town.
Interesting too that when he walks into the office, we don't see who is in there until like we see Don kind of reacting of just like, usually, like I know about these meetings or whatever he says. Yeah.
Yeah, but then he scolds the other guys, for laughing and because he knows.
Yeah, he sticks up.
Yeah.
But I think you can clearly take from that's like, because especially when he says like it's just a man's name, right? Like again, he's not talking about Freddy necessarily. I think he cares about Freddy, but he's talking about himself.
Yeah.
Like that to me is like what keeps coming back.
Personally, I felt that line was a little heavy-handed, knowing the writing.
It was very PSA. It was very just like, like you're in elementary school, Will just beat his pants so he's not there. But like we like bring in like the video, like the TV, and it's just like, a bullying PSA basically. It's just like, hey, cut that out.
You have to remember too that specifically Dick Whitman has a history of peeing himself.
Yeah, that's right. Well done, Michael. Yeah, no wonder, wow. I think, it's really getting to him. And I think that too, like there is a hypocrisy there of like, Freddy gets drunk at work. That describes a lot of people. It's Sterling Cooper, like on a day-to-day basis. And it is a little bit of like, if it could happen to him, I mean, come on.
Exactly. It's like you're younger, you're drinking the same amount as him. Just like see you in 20 years when you're pissing yourself, Harry Crane.
Yeah, I mean, it also like they're obviously so Don also has that same insecurity about his age and like his status, and like when Freddy is just like Monday will come sooner than you'll expect. I mean, that's also true for age and aging out of the business, as it were. And so I mean, it's kind of I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it seemed like a kind of warning, like I'm out, but you guys might be out too someday. You never know. So they gotta enjoy the moment, and it's fitting that we're recording this on a Monday morning.
I like how quick Dawn, kind of deflects when, Betty's just sort of like, well, what do you want to do? Like when they have their little confrontation and he's just like, I don't know, like I'll say that I have an account in Philly and they're putting me up except for the weekend. And she's just like, did you just come up with that? And he deflects immediately. He's like not even engaging with it. He's just like, or I could just come home. And clearly like his mentality for Betty is like move forward. Like he hates being in this like transition, or he hates being in this limbo. It's driving Don crazy because he wants to be like moving forward in some way. And you can tell like when he says later to Roger, like, honestly, I was just relieved, like he doesn't feel bad. Like he doesn't feel bad about what he's done. For him though, it's just like he wants something to happen. And, he doesn't feel like he can leave her because he's not in love and it doesn't make sense, right? And he doesn't want to admit what he did. He's keeping a secret. But then on the other hand, he wants Betty to make her mind up because I think to him, it's just like, fine, if Betty wants to divorce me, whatever. Like, that's going to be her and she's going to have to deal the brunt of like her doing that to him without, supposed proof that he was unfaithful. But I think either way, he's just sort of like balls in your court, and like it's not fun for him. But yeah, he's a jerk.
I don't know if I would necessarily say that he doesn't feel bad at all.
He does say a little bit. Yeah. He's like,
because,
sometimes I do.
I think of like in times of my life when there's been like bad things happen, like cutting to today's like global economy and all these layoffs that are happening. My company has gone through 2 rounds of them, and I've survived both of them. But I remember thinking like if I did get laid off, there would be a bit of relief because there was like kind of like an answer, or like all these things you've been worried about for so long, like you finally have an end result for it. So I think that's really what he's saying there is like, this has been going on for so long. I've had this double life for so long. It's just kind of nice to not have to worry about it anymore. But not trying to defend Don at all.
I think that's a good interpretation though. Yeah. I wanted to mention that it's kind of weird how like when Betty is like trying to break into his desk, that like as soon as like she makes a loud noise, Carla had to have been like hovering outside of that office. This is a very minor thing, but she literally just like, Bobby, and I'm just like, God damn, Carla, like,
was it a setup? Was it does she know that it's Betty in there and she's just waiting for her moment? I was a little bit like, is she kind of, because she's a little prepared. She's just like, I've been married for over 20 years, and Betty's just like, look, no, they're not doing this, but then I like how Betty does apologize. Like she's very mean, but she's like immediately just like, no, I'm sorry. Like it's showing that like she is a human being, even though she can be a very bad human being. Yeah. So why do you guys think Betty's always sorry?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say Betty's always been, I think, a little bit more sympathetic to quote unquote the help.
Interesting. I mean, do you think there's a little bit of like a kind of a similarity between how like she probably had a black housekeeper nanny the way that Sally does, and is kind of like seeing a certain pattern play out because she's talked about like the issues she's had with her mother, And, you know, she might kind of see like the same kind of thing happening with Sally, actually, because it looks like Sally's upset because her dad isn't around. Bobby doesn't seem to care. He's just like, whatever, just leave me alone. But Sally, you know, like going with Carla in the very first scene with Betty. And yeah, I just wonder if she's a little scared about like what will play out if she doesn't kind of change things.
She's seen this movie before.
Yeah. It's called Ship of Fools. Came out in 1965. Not true. I mean, it did come out in 1965, but it doesn't really relate to this.
Amazing analysis.
I was gonna let Don, go to something with Don, but before we do, I did want to ask you guys, why do you think Betty stages that whole situation for Sarah Beth Carson to probably sleep with Arthur? You know, like you see it on her face, like she goes to the stables, and as soon as she's just like, oh yeah, we could all hang out, and then her face changes, like she's pretending to be happy. Why do you think she's doing this? I have my theory for it, but you know, I know we said before, like, yeah, she's mean, but obviously something else has to be going on here, right?
I think it's a little bit like an experiment where like she's so mad at Dawn and doesn't understand how a person could do this, and so she's setting two people up to see, okay, what makes you do this? And do you actually do this? Also, maybe this is a bit of a reach. Maybe she's also trying to find some sympathy for Don. And she's like, well, you know, people do this. And it's not just because he's such a bad person, but people do this. Like this person who I don't think would do it is maybe going to do it.
Well, related to that, then do you think she's trying to like cheat on Don by proxy of like, I'm not going to do it, but I can like make it so somebody else does and then see what happens?
I was kind of wondering about that as well, because I mean, we have seen Betty be kind of skittish about having an affair outright. I think it's because she has this sort of fear of like, well, if I have an affair, am I any better than him? Like, am I just kind of repeating, you know, am I a hypocrite for, you know, worrying about this and like,
I also think she's smart enough to realize if she gets caught, like she's, you know, the consequences are more dire for her.
Oh,
than
sure.
It would be.
Yeah. It's not really worth the risk. But yeah, I mean, I think it is part of that. I think it's also her trying to kind of regain some sense of control that she's lost since, you know, losing Dawn. Like we said, she seems to be kind of not really in a place where she feels like that sense of stability or that sense of like purpose in her life. And I feel like this is something that could kind of drive her a little bit, that she can kind of, like you said, experiment and see where things can go with this sort of hypothetical situation. And yeah, I mean, people are probably going to get hurt in the long run, but it helps Betty somehow. So I guess to her, it's like, well, you know, it's going to make me stronger. You know, fuck.
That's the thing too. If she views herself a little bit too much as Tara and then views Dawn as Arthur, I wonder too if she wants to see how it feels if he sleeps with somebody else. That being, you know, Sarah Beth Carson. And I wonder if part of her is sort of being like, how would I feel, you know, in that situation? I don't know, like maybe to what Mike was saying, is it some kind of like sympathy play or some kind of, I just want to understand people and I don't care. I don't think she cares about either of them. I think that she's straight up like Sarah Beth Carson. She wanted a little bit of a tiny bit of revenge for kind of being so like dismissive and sort of being like an annoying, you know, chatty Cathy to her. Yeah, Betty's dangerous. You got to be careful around her. That's for sure. Okay, so we get the whole thing where the three guys, the three buddies, the Mad Men go out for a night on the town. And yeah, this to me is when the episode starts getting good. This is like when I start getting into it more, for sure.
Who's who in this scenario?
Well, who's getting a 6-month leave? I think we established earlier that was you, Will. So sure. I guess you're Freddy.
All right.
This case.
So I'm going to put on my bowler hat then, and then who are you two?
I guess that makes me Roger, and Mike is Don. I guess.
There you go.
Mike is pretty secret.
No, yeah, that's true. But I'm also having sex with one of your 19-year-old coworkers, John. So.
Yeah, are you also engaged to that? This whole time,
well, not yet. I got my own Mona, Hannah. Trying to figure stuff out, man.
Wow, that's weird. Yeah, so I guess that answered your question. So where are we going first? We're going to go to I guess an underground casino where the password is not swordfish, unfortunately.
I'm sorry. First, we're going to fire somebody for drinking too much by going out on the town and drinking with them.
But that's kind of a common practice, isn't it, to like send somebody off, right?
I mean, they called attention to that because like Freddy was even kind of willing to be like, all right, I'll like stop. They're like, no, this is your like last hurrah, man. Let's go for it. And they're like, oh, okay, let's do it. Yeah. So yeah,
I think it is ironic. there is that like it's ironic, but there's also I think like that old guard kinship. I don't think Roger really wanted to get rid of Freddy, but I think he's doing it because he's being overly cautious. And it is interesting how Roger like behaves in this episode. It's not always intuitive to like how we understand him.
Yeah, I mean, it always felt more like a formality. Like, well, we kind of have to fire you. Like, I mean, we can't kind of keep this going, but that doesn't mean we can't have a good time.
It's like one thing off of Roger's plate.
I think it's like also a mental battle within Roger of like, okay, what fight do I want to fight? Like, would I rather fight for Freddy, or I'd rather fight for the fact that I want to marry this secretary? Like, what's going to make me, I don't want to have to deal with both these things with Cooper. I'd rather just have one thing.
True. And I also think that, when it comes to Don, he clearly is pretty loyal to Freddy. And, Freddy says that whole thing to him. It's just like, I'm going to miss you. You're really talented. I think it genuinely flatters Don. And I think in a similar way, he probably owes a lot to Freddy as well, because, we still don't, know yet in the show how Don kind of came up with Sterling Cooper, but you can kind of infer that, Freddy was one of like the OG copywriters who probably, was very helpful to Don, or was somebody who was like really grateful to him or helpful to him. So, clearly like Don respects Freddy and acknowledges that he's really talented. He trusts Freddy enough that when Freddy points out that Peggy has talent, Don listens. And I think Don has respect for Freddy as like a writer and knows that he's good at his job. But at the same time, it's just kind of like, you can tell that like Freddy understands that mutual respect, because as soon as Don kind of steps in with Roger, that's when Freddy's just like, oh, like I can't talk myself out of this. Like I'm done. And it's really sad, like, because you can see Don wavering. You can see Don being like looking at Roger, being like, bro, he's making some good points, dude. Like that thing about your dad, harsh but fair. Like, it's pretty funny.
Dick Moneybags. Oh no, Dick Dollars. Mike Dollars.
Yeah, that's what we should have done for names on this episode. We didn't do that.
Mike Moneybags. Yeah. Wilden Cats.
Yeah.
Will, would you like to, for the record, to share what your name is for this episode?
What's that? Oh, I mean,
Would you like, for the record, to share?
I mean, you can start, because I'm just
I know
playing
what
off
show
of yours.
you've been watching.
Well, I haven't watched the show at all. I can't.
I haven't either. I entered the room as Mindy Kaling's Velma.
And then I did Velma Dinkley's Mindy to kind of play off of that.
And John say John.
Yeah, when you don't got something, don't give it. I was going to mention too that I think it's funny that when they go into there, like Roger like instinctively asks Freddy for $5, but then he's like, oh wait, sorry, like because he just fired him. It's like, sorry, really funny. Don. Definitely noticeable that Don says his name is Tilden Katz when he's trying to, a very anti-Semitic joke that Don makes, obviously, because they're making up names related to like rich, people with money. And so the anti-Semitic trope of, Jewish people controlling banks or whatever. But of course, I think that the Minkins thing has like triggered that response of like, I wish I was that guy. I wish that I had gone with Rachel last season. I mean, he tried, but like she shot him down. But I think there's a lot of that yearning, of like, I could have avoided this whole thing with Betty if I was with Rachel. And now instead, because he even says later of like, I wish I was in love, then I know what to do. And it seems like he's resolute now. It's like, I would leave Betty for somebody that I love.
If it weren't for you meddling kids.
And your Mad Men podcast. So then they're getting super drunk. Part of me wondered too, like if they were doing that because I kind of think that like Roger and Don are feeling, maybe more of Roger probably is feeling a little bit slighted about what Freddy said about them not drinking as much as his dad. And I wonder if that's part of like why he's like getting a little bit extra, toasted there. But that might be a little bit of a stretch. I was going to mention too that so the waitress who shows up in the casino, not the second person who's kind of like somewhat flirting with them, but the first person who comes to take their orders, that is Cater Gordon, who's a writer in the show. I think she started writing for the show around this time and then going into season 3. However, Cater Gordon went on later to accuse Matthew Weiner of sexual harassment. This was in 2017. She was fired from the show in 2009, I want to say. And, since has like kind of come out and said that like, Weiner was essentially pretty toxic. I'm not aware of any other allegations of sexual harassment against Weiner, but certainly like it's pretty sad, to see this happen. And like there's even like if you listen to the commentary on this episode, like you hear Weiner kind of say some like pretty sexist stuff about Kidder Gordon. Like, oh, she's a bit easy on the eyes, more sexist in like context of like later on. I think part of the allegation is that he was like asking to see her naked and like said that she owed it to him. And pretty despicable behavior. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there and make you guys sad. Sad for Kidder Gordon.
I mean, we talked about that a little bit in season 1, right?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it. Yeah. But it's been a while, so I wanted to make sure.
Right. No, it's definitely worth discussing, to be sure.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Matthew Weiner's canceled? I think we have to join in the decision.
Kind of is, right? Like he hasn't really been doing it.
He's been kind of on the outs. Yeah.
I mean, there was that Amazon Prime show that didn't get second season, and that's been about it, right?
That's been it. He did the Romanovs, which was kind of like an anthology. So yeah. I guess we could move on to put a stink in the air, but what are you gonna do? Okay. I do also like when Roger says to Don, it's just like, you're so secretive. It's like I kind of like it's sort of like how I feel sometimes with Don. It's just like, come on, open up a little bit. He does open up eventually, and I think part of the reason he does is because like after what happens with Jimmy and then what Freddy says to him kind of shakes him. I think he's starting to like, I think the alcohol is helping too, but he starts to say things more that he probably wouldn't risk. Like he mentions his dad, he says, oh, that was a real Archibald Whitman maneuver. But of course it's like, just some hothead drunk I used to know. But yeah, like in a sober mind, in a different state of mind, Don would not say something like that. He would not take that risk. Yeah,
no way he says even just the name. That was like, I thought we were actually going to get more out of Don, like once he started talking about Archibald. But then all you get is, I'm staying at the Roosevelt, just like, fuck you, Don. Like, and it's funny too, because Roger's response is, well, that's a start. And Don's like, nah, motherfucker, that's everything you're getting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even before they have that whole conversation, when Freddy says, like, if I don't go into that office every day, who am I? You can tell that messes with Don. He doesn't have an answer. And Matthew Weiner has said that like that question, that entire sentiment is this show. Like that is what this entire show is getting at, of like the person who, like, if they don't have this like environment, this office, this thing that they're building, then what is their identity? And I think that's something we should keep in mind as we progress through the show, because it's going to continue to evolve as a question. And we have to pay attention, I think, to like, well, sometimes what are the characters' answers to that question? How do they change and so on? So we've already covered a lot of the rest of this. I guess like we have the whole thing where Don says, he gives kind of advice to Roger. And again, in this case, like Don's not really talking about Roger. He's talking about himself. He's not really saying that Roger should leave Mona. Like he's just kind of talking about how he feels like he needs to move forward because it's his life. And I think when you don't have that honesty and you're sort of like treating your friends like with therapy, you kind of get these misunderstandings, because then sure enough, Roger takes what he says and then leaves Mona for Jane, and Mona like chews Don out for it, rightfully so. But you can tell too that like Don can't even defend himself, because he's not going to reveal like what he really meant when he said that, because then he'd have to, admit to Mona, that like something's going on with his marriage. And so I find that all very interesting. That's why I think like the end of the episode is so much stronger for me, because it just feels like all of this stuff is like really, I don't know, just there's way more like meaning and nuance to everything that's going on that is really clicking for me.
Right on. I get it.
Did you feel, okay, Will, you didn't cry when Sally, hugged your dad because she felt like she was losing him, which I thought was weird that you didn't cry.
Sure.
But did you cry when Don shut the door on Roger?
No.
His friend? You didn't cry?
Nope.
Did you feel anything?
I was like, that was a good episode of Mad Men. Time to record an episode of Mad Men.
Jane, he wants Jane off his desk, so the search for a secretary, continues. That's 3 secretaries so far in one season. Wow. And that is the episode. It ends with Marilyn Monroe singing "I'm Through with Love." which was obviously very intentional. A very melancholy song from Marilyn Monroe, which I appreciate. But yeah, before we get to trivia, was there anything else that you guys wanted to tie off?
No, I mean, I wanted to say with the Marilyn Monroe thing, like, I think when we did Extra Milestone for Something Like It Hot, we kind of talked about how it's easier when you look back on Marilyn Monroe's performances, like knowing the tragedy of her life, that's easier to kind of see that sadness, but it's very easy to kind of not see that at the time. You can be sympathetic to why that wasn't so apparent in her performances. And yeah, I mean, I think that's something I really appreciate about this episode. I mean, even when you know, I don't think it was always super elegant about kind of incorporating the Marilyn Monroe story, but I felt it was a nice kind of tie together along with the Freddy storyline. And it was, yeah, even if it is a little messy, I thought it complemented the show well. I mean, it continues the show's search to figure out, like, can you find that separation between work and home life? Is it always going to be sort of interchangeable? Even having a blood drive at work, you know, literally giving your blood at work, I thought was a very kind of pointed touch for that reoccurring theme. And yeah, I thought it was stronger than you gave it credit, John, but I can understand your criticisms.
I think I just wanted to clarify. I don't know if I was super clear with how I was discussing it. I think Freddy Rumsen has a big dick.
I think you're right. I would go to bat for that theory.
Big dick Freddy.
Let's do trivia then. So according to Matthew Weiner, and I think this is something that's been brought up before, but I don't know if we've mentioned it. So the stairs on that set that in the Draper house, they don't actually lead to the bedrooms that you see in the show. Those bedrooms are on a totally different set. So that's something that's actually clarified in this episode in the commentary. Something else. So Wiener's talked a lot about how they chose. He said that he's heard a lot of stories about people peeing their pants like in the office, and so he's always wanted to include that in the show because apparently it did happen, like in real life. You know, people getting, and you can understand it, like people getting day drunk and then so like drunk that obviously it creates some incontinence, if you will.
I just imagine like you know how you have like those like little like note cards that you like put on to like build an episode, and you like kind of like tie it all together. I just imagine he has like one that he's written since season 1, just like pee pants ? And like he's like proposing it for each episode, like no, not that one. And then like we finally got to this one. It's like, could it be? Could this be the one?
This is it. This is the episode where it all comes together.
Of course, the note card is yellow for the significance of it.
Right. Well, it has to be. Yeah. And they probably put like a couple droplets of water on it.
How cool would it be if it was practical? I would respect the shit out of that guy.
It was not practical. Well, it was practical in the sense like it wasn't his real pee, but they used a tube. So that's part of the trivia as well. Similar to Red in the Face when they used that for Roger's vomit.
It's like, bring back the tube.
Yeah, get that tube out. But speaking of which, that scene took 3 to 4 hours to shoot. The scene in the office, just that, like, what is it, like 2.5 minutes, if that. But yeah, it was apparently a lot. So like you can tell, like they had to do a lot of makeup for Joel Murray because he looks all sweaty and rattled, and it was probably really hard to keep the takes consistent for him to have that flow, that seamless flow of like he's still, you know, in his ragged state, right? And then also, I kind of already mentioned this before, but it was like a specific directing choice from Michael Uppendahl to show Don getting ambushed by Duck and Pete in the meeting, but we don't see who it is until he sits down. And that was like a very purposeful thing. It wasn't just sort of like a, you know, happenstance. And then there's that whole thing where Freddy says, like, my dad would open up a map and then just point to it and be like, Memphis. Who wants to live in Memphis? Not me. Sorry, I love that delivery. He's like really getting into a story. But the whole idea of like opening a map and picking a location to move was actually a story that a friend told Weiner that his dad used to do in the 1930s or wherever it was. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, you know, would you guys do that? Point to a map and just be like, Pittsburgh? I don't know. Who would want to live in Pittsburgh? Not me.
Would be fun, yeah.
Seattle.
If it was the 30s and, you know, apartments cost $2 for like a 9-year lease, yeah, I'm sure I'd do it.
Sure. Michael Uppendahl also said that the original line that he think he had, or I think the original line that Matt had before he changed it instead of Memphis was "I'll never leave Manhattan." But he says he said he's like glad that Matt changed it because it was a little bit more giving flavor to Freddy, like not just like a typical New Yorker, which was yeah, I agree with that. So we already actually mentioned this, but the address that Freddy Rumsen gives the cab driver when they leave the casino is 152 Riverside Drive, which, first of all, Riverside is the podcasting software we use. That's fun. But also, it's the same address that Joe Fox, played by Tom Hanks, gives in You've Got Mail. It's kind of a funny, I don't know if it's coincidence or just one of those addresses that gets tossed around because, that's like a little wink and a nod to other things. Since that is also a New York movie. Although I did find it kind of weird that Freddy tells him his apartment number. It's like, why does a cab driver need to know that? That was strange.
Because he's drunk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess that's the only way to put it. He doesn't even seem that drunk though when they're leaving. Like he seems like the most sober of the group, which kind of speaks to what you were saying before, right?
That's just because he's always drunk at work, and that's only how you've seen him. So yeah, exactly, I'm sure he seemed normal to you, John.
yeah, sure. Have you guys ever gotten drunk at work before?
Yep.
You?
Wow, I was not expecting 2 yups and that's a no from me, Doc. Wow. I mean, I've gotten buzzed at work. Never drunk.
Didn't have like a Christmas party?
Yeah, well.
Never had like a Christmas party or?
Yeah, but I've got drunk at those. Like, that is a.
Man,
to me, being drunk around coworkers is not a good idea. No, thank you. I did consider getting drunk during the Nixon Kennedy election, but everybody was getting drunk.
I work in sales, John. It's the one part of Mad Men that I really connect with. You really do got to keep up with people.
Joel Murray has also said that the guy driving the cab wasn't even an actor. He was just renting the cab. So I thought that was kind of funny. And he said that the guy was apparently having the best time on set. And so I was like, man, that must be what it's like to have Will Ashton as an extra. He's probably just, happy to be there,
It's like cheese cubes, a whole table of food.
Talk about my birthday.
Yeah.
The scene where Don and Roger are the last people in the bar was actually shot at 3 a.m. So like nice little authenticity there. And that whole thing where John Slattery like punches Don in the arm. Apparently, right after they cut, John Hamm punched John Slattery in retaliation. Which he's done that a bunch in the show. Like, there's a history of Hamm sort of roughhousing with Slattery a bit.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say just him punching because I saw Jimmy Barrett.
Yeah, there's a lot of punching in this episode. Yeah, including Floyd, the champ.
Yeah.
Who? I forgot to mention that it's funny how they mention he's just like, he's not going to lose. He would never lose. But he loses to Sonny Liston, I think like a month after this in 1962. So he's like getting toward the end of his career, if I want to say, because he was more prominent in the 50s. But and then the last thing I have here, John Slattery has said, you kind of notice that like Don is like kind of like he's not as clean shaven already. And John Slattery has said that like Hamm has had to shave like 5 times a day, which is actually not that much of an embellishment. Because he just, no wonder we get so many scenes of Don shaving. It's probably like because John Hamm is just like, yeah, I got to shave anyway, and we got to shoot this scene. Let's go. And that's it for trivia.
I'm jealous. I wish my face hair grew that fast. I could just be like, have a full beard.
Yeah, I only shave like once a week.
Wow.
And like I could shave every day, but I don't mind having a bit of stubble.
There you go.
But it's like once it starts to get like a little prickly, that's when I'm like, all right, I'll shave. Fine. How often do you shave, Mike? Because you got a nice little you look pretty like you trim it, you like even it out. It looks like you have a whole routine.
I do. It's not like a routine where like I do it like every day or so. It's like if I look in the mirror and realize I need it, and it's a number 3. Like razor through everything, and then I clean up like the stash and the lines and everything.
Yeah. Like Hannah comes in, sits down, it's just like, don't worry, I won't talk. You're just like,
no, she talks.
For those who forgot, that's a reference to I think that 2 episodes ago, I want to say. But all right, next week we are going to talk about. Let me bring it up. I forget the name of the episode, but I will have it here in a second. The Inheritance, episode 10. And I don't remember if I like this episode. I don't think I do. I think I'm in the zone of this season where I'm struggling a bit. But yeah, I'm glad. Will, you at least, and I think you too, Mike, to some extent, are liking these last couple episodes because it's better than the alternative.
We have 3 left this season, right?
We have 4.
Mhm.
4? Okay.
So we have the Inheritance. After that, we'll talk about the Jet Set, and then the Mountain King, and then the last episode of the season is Meditations in an Emergency.
All right.
So lots coming up. But thank you as always for listening, and we'll see you after we watch the next episode of Mad Men. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.